For the past 2 years, I've been travelling all across Japan, looking for every inspiration for Breath of the Wild. And there's a lot that I've been able to uncover. This is one of the most beloved games of all time, and its origins, the details that make this world feel so alive, are deeply and fundamentally Japanese. From the earliest influences on the franchise to the clearest of real-world connections, there's a life and depth to this game that I've been trying to understand, and I found it in the most obscure of Japan's traditions, in the deepest corners of its history, in the inspirations that nobody has ever noticed before. So join me as I uncover the origins of The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. So, let's start with some context. When the original Legend of Zelda was first released back in 1986, the game's lead director, and essentially now the father of the franchise, Shigeru Miyamoto, described it as a miniature garden that you could put into a drawer and revisit any time you like. Essentially, it was a game comprised of these little enclosed spaces that you would play through and explore, like small forests filled with enemies to fight, or strange dungeons containing secret items. And Miyamoto actually designed all of these by hand, using nothing but whiteboards and graph paper, with some help from his co-designer Takashi Tezuka. Over the course of about 2 years, together they designed the game under the working title Adventure. Their vision was to create an experience that had exploration at its core, offering players more freedom than any game had ever done before. Essentially, they ended up designing the blueprint for the open world genre. And for Miyamoto, the origin of that idea, of a vast open world waiting to be explored, came from Japan's countryside, which is where our journey begins. This is where I've lived for the past 2 years, surrounded by the quiet nature of Kyushu, gaining a deeper understanding of exactly how these landscapes help shape the franchise. And there's a few things that I've discovered. The first is that Miyamoto grew up specifically here, a small countryside town in the middle of Kyoto prefecture known as Sonobe. It's an area that's similar to where I live now, but arguably even more rural. In fact, its name in kanji reads literally as the area of garden. And so, it was exploring these landscapes as a child that ultimately inspired Miyamoto to design the first Zelda game, creating his miniature garden from the one he grew up in.
積み重ねながら自分で感じたのは、子供の頃とかに山に登ったとか湖に行ったとか、そういう世界をイメージして何かを書けば、多分遊んでる人の中にもそういう世界が出てくるから。
But all this exploration began with one discovery in particular for Miyamoto, impacting him more than any other: a hidden cave in a forest near his home. Stumbling upon it at the age of just 7 or 8 years old, and returning the very next day to explore its depths with nothing but a lantern, it was here that Miyamoto's love of adventure truly began, the experience he credits as being the origin point for The Legend of Zelda. But of course, there's just one Zelda game that went on to capture this experience with more life and detail than any other. Where Miyamoto's original Hyrule was imagined as a miniature garden, this rendition, almost 4 decades later, was closer to an entirely realized world. One where you could go anywhere, explore any path. It revolutionized what an open world game could be, and it did that by returning to the roots of the franchise, to the sense of freedom that Miyamoto tried to capture in the first place.
僕の中にはこの初代のゼルダを全然違った形でその自由度を臨場感たっぷり楽しめるものとしてこのブレスオブザワイルドを作り始めたっていう。
The depth that Breath of the Wild has, this unique sense of life and presence, is something that's imbued within every corner of this game's world. And so, as I take you through it, we'll see exactly where all of this depth really comes from. So this is the first area we're met with in the game, the Great Plateau. At this point in the story, Link has woken up after being asleep for 100 years, with no memory of what came before. And so the surroundings he explores are a kind of microcosm for the rest of Hyrule, introducing us to a few fundamental aspects of the world. It's where the ancient Sheikah shrines and towers are introduced, and where we first encounter the physics and combat mechanics of the game. But the plateau is also home to one of the most significant locations in all of Breath of the Wild, the Temple of Time. This is where Link is given his central quest in the game to defeat Calamity Ganon. And it's this location I want to look at first, because it's where the deeper atmosphere of Hyrule begins to emerge. An atmosphere that I also came to feel when I first started exploring rural Japan. And there's two important parts to this, the first of which can be found here. These are the remains of an old power station in Kyushu that sit quietly on the edge of a waterfall, abandoned since 1961. And not only do they look eerily similar to the Temple of Time itself, they also reflect the part of Hyrule's atmosphere that I came across first in rural Japan, which is a sense of abandonment. This is something that permeates every corner of Hyrule, with ruins being at the very forefront of Breath of the Wild's design. They shape the game's visual language, and more than that, they define its emotional tone as a world that's rooted in loss. And in many ways, this is exactly what I've experienced in the countryside, as rural populations have been in steep decline for decades. Venturing out from my own small town and into the mountains, I've found overgrown farmland, forgotten businesses, even entire villages left completely in ruin. But it's not only ruins that I've come across in the countryside, because where I felt an even clearer sense of Hyrule's atmosphere has actually been with Shinto shrines. These are hidden all throughout the countryside, ranging from jinja, the major sites found in most villages and used for festivals or ceremonies, to these smaller structures known as hokora, often integrated deep within nature. And ultimately, they give a deeper sense of sacredness to Japan's landscapes, being thought to house kami, the Shinto spirits that grant blessings and guidance to those who visit. In the game, Shinto shrines are clearly mirrored by the Sheikah shrines, sacred sites that contain ancient guardians, offering blessings to the player in the form of spirit orbs. And scattered throughout Hyrule, in 120 different locations, they serve as a main pillar of progression in the game, in much the same way that Shinto shrines have motivated my exploration in Japan. And so, these are the initial parallels that I noticed when I first started exploring Japan's countryside, but they actually point to something deeper about how these landscapes help shape this game. Because just as Miyamoto drew from his childhood memories when designing the original Legend of Zelda, the development team for Breath of the Wild wanted to do the same. This was a design choice early on in development, where the team would reflect on their own formative experiences, shaping these elements of Hyrule, not just from imagination, but also from their childhood adventures in the countryside, of exploring nearby mountains and finding Shinto shrines or long-forgotten ruins. It's clear that this was the first main inspiration for the game, this sense of love and nostalgia for exploring the countryside. But there's actually one location in Breath of the Wild that takes this idea even further. Kakariko Village is the second main location that Link discovers on his journey across Hyrule, and it's our first real glimpse of civilization in the game, albeit a small and secluded community hidden among the mountains. The people who live here are the last remnants of the Sheikah clan, an ancient group now carrying out a humble life of farming. And in the deeper history of Hyrule, they were the ones who built the ancient technologies of the game, the shrines, towers, and guardians that now lie in ruin across Hyrule. These creations eventually came to be feared by the kingdom, leading the Sheikah to be banished here, forced into hiding among these mountains. But I brought you here next because this location actually reminds me of somewhere I've been to in Japan before. This is an isolated village in the mountains of northern Kyushu, known as Okawachiyama, and its connections to Kakariko are subtle. Over 400 years old, Okawachiyama is a tiny village of just 30 pottery workshops, marked by a handful of chimneys and ceramic-lined streets. And this distinct appearance actually stems from its history as the birthplace of Japanese porcelain. Known as Nabeshima ware, this unique kind of porcelain came to Japan in the early 1600s, when it was introduced by Korean potters. But it was the ruling samurai clan of this region, the Nabeshima, who first seized control of it. And wanting to keep its methods of production a secret, they brought 880 Korean potters here, establishing Okawachiyama as a village of secret kilns, where it would remain hidden for centuries. In this way, Okawachiyama seems strangely similar to Kakariko, as a secluded village hidden in the mountains because of the knowledge its people possessed. But it's this strange parallel that actually reveals something deeper about Japan's influence on the game. As the lead art director, Satoru Takizawa, explained, Breath of the Wild's art style was designed with a focus on things that are rooted in the climate and culture of Japan that we understand with our own bodies. And so, while Kakariko wasn't directly based on Okawachiyama, this part of the game feels so similar because it captures a deeper and more intuitive sense of atmosphere, of what it's like to be in a traditional Japanese village like this one. And there's all kinds of details that deepen this feeling. You can see it in the design of the Sheikah homes, for instance, which feature elements of Shinmei-zukuri, an indigenous style of architecture, or in the many wind chimes that resemble shimenawa, protective Shinto barriers that ward off evil spirits. There's also the goddess statue at the village centre, which mirrors a jizo, a protective shrine for children and travellers. Details like these can be found throughout the game, and they don't come from simply copying Japan, but from a subtler effort to evoke the country's atmosphere. Even the Sheikah technology does this, designed by Takizawa himself and modelled on the ancient pottery of the Jomon, these ancient creations with intricate spiralling patterns.
理由としては割と世界の人たちに知られていないようなところのもので、不思議な感じというかミステリアスな感じっていうのをすごくアピールしたかったので。
Ultimately, it's for this reason that Breath of the Wild often feels so quietly and unmistakably Japanese, rooted in a more intuitive understanding of the country.
This one here is called the Silent Princess. It's a rare, endangered species. Despite our efforts, we can't get them to grow domestically yet. The princess can only thrive out here, in the wild. All that we can hope is that the species will be strong enough to prosper on its own.
So, having left Kakariko Village, this is when the game really starts to open up, and we're left with the vastness of the world to explore. What defines much of this exploration are the many smaller moments of interaction and combat that Link goes through on his travels. But punctuating these moments are also a handful of deeper story beats that are scattered throughout the world, like the lost memories you recover, or the sites of major side quests in the game. Of course, there's one main objective that underpins all of this, however, and that lies with the 4 divine beasts, the ancient machines that now rest at the far reaches of Hyrule. Built long ago to defend the kingdom from Calamity Ganon, it's Link's main quest in the game to find each one of these beasts and fight off the malice that now infects them. They essentially function as the 4 main dungeons of the game, boss levels that have been a pillar of the Zelda franchise since its inception. And so, as I looked into many of these remaining elements of the game and what might have inspired them, the answers that I found actually pointed me to one specific place in Japan, somewhere away from Miyamoto's hometown and the countryside, and instead they brought me here, to the city of Kyoto, the next stop on our journey. This is a festival that's held every year in honor of a mythic creature called Seiryu, the Blue Dragon. And it takes place at one of the most significant locations in all of Kyoto, at a site called Kiyomizu-dera, meaning Temple of Pure Water. Built high up on a mountain at the site of a sacred spring, it's said in ancient legends that Seiryu would fly along the eastern river of Kyoto and visit this temple to drink from its sacred water. And so, to this day, priests, soldiers, and festival performers act out this story, parading the dragon through the temple and down to its surrounding streets. But I'm showing you this because in Breath of the Wild, at the eastern edge of Hyrule, high up on Mount Lanayru, there sits another sacred source of water that's also guarded by a mythical blue dragon. And that's the Spring of Wisdom. This location is home to one of the few core side quests of the game, where you encounter the dragon, Naedra, and free it from its corruption. And it's a part of the game that was clearly modelled on this iconic site in Kyoto. Naedra even follows the exact same path as Seiryu upon its release, flying from above the Spring of Wisdom and down through the eastern river below. This inspiration has never been directly confirmed by the developers, as far as I can tell, but I'm certain of its influence for one reason in particular, which is that if you take the overworld of Hyrule and place a map of Kyoto City directly on top of it, these two locations would actually line up with each other, almost exactly. And what this points to is a much deeper way in which Kyoto shaped Breath of the Wild. Because what the team struggled with most when first designing this new open-world version of Zelda was finding the right scale for the game, determining how large the world should actually be. And in order to solve this, the game's lead director, Hidemaro Fujibayashi, decided to turn to the place that he knew best. Not only is Kyoto the cultural heart of Japan, the city with the most temples and the most tourists in the entire country, it's also where Breath of the Wild was being developed, and where Fujibayashi himself was born and raised, which is why, at the start of development, he decided to take a map of Kyoto City and overlay it on top of Hyrule, using its major landmarks as a guide for those in the game.
馬で走った時にどれぐらいの速度で行けるんだろうかっていうのを考える上で、実は京都の地形っていうのを当てはめて考えるっていうのはすごく分かりやすかったんですね。
And what this ultimately reveals is that throughout Hyrule, there are these subtle reflections of real-world sites in Kyoto, like the Hebra Mountains in the northwest, for example, which map perfectly onto the terrain of Ukkyo Ward, a mountainous area in the northwest of the city. And there's also the placement of Hyrule Castle at the very centre of the game, which lines up with the original site of Kyoto's ancient imperial palace, known as Heian-kyo. There are two locations that also seem to reference Nintendo itself, with Lover's Pond mirroring the company's current headquarters in Kyoto, while the Broken Heart Pond seems to align closely with where Nintendo was originally based, a building that's now been converted into a hotel. There are no doubt many more of these locations to be found throughout this city, and ultimately they show us just how foundational Kyoto was to the design of Breath of the Wild. But there's actually one more thing that I discovered here, and it's something that ties Kyoto not just to Hyrule's geography, but to the entire story that remains in Breath of the Wild. And it's something I came upon again at Kiyomizu-dera. Because Seiryu, the Blue Dragon, is also described as one of the 4 divine beasts of Kyoto. This comes from a mythology hidden deep within Kyoto's history, that just like the 4 divine beasts of Hyrule, Kyoto has its own guardians, known as the Shi-Seiju, meaning the 4 sacred or divine beasts, with Genbu, the black turtle, Suzaku, the vermilion bird, Byakko, the white tiger, and of course Seiryu, the blue dragon. These creatures are said to have watched over the city since it was founded in 794, and they clearly mirror the beasts of Breath of the Wild, these 4 distinct animals, each with a different elemental power. They're what drive the core narrative of the game, with Link's wider quest being to hunt them down and set them free as he travels across Hyrule. But their significance goes deeper than this, because in Kyoto's mythology, the Shi-Seiju were more than just symbols. Presiding at the four borders of the city, they were thought to protect Kyoto from natural disasters. And most of all, their strength was believed to converge upon the imperial palace at the very heart of the city, where they would defend the emperor from forces of evil and destruction. And this is exactly the story we see embodied in Breath of the Wild, where the divine beasts positioned at the four corners of the world ultimately unite their powers at Hyrule Castle in a final stand against Calamity Ganon, bringing peace to the land once more. So, where does all this leave us then? It's clear that Kyoto's history and mythology had a fundamental impact in shaping some of the most iconic elements of Breath of the Wild. But the question that remains is how all these different inspirations we've explored actually come together, how they give the game this sense of life and presence that we've been trying to understand. And as I continued on this journey, I came to realize that there was one more aspect of Japan that held the answer. I said before that it's Shinto shrines where I felt the clearest sense of this game's atmosphere. And so that's where I've seemed to find myself most while making this video, just looking for these different shrines in Japan, but never fully understanding why. Shintoism is the oldest and deepest part of this country, so much so that it's more of a cultural mindset than it is a religion, and at its core is a belief in animism, the idea that within all things there exists life, or a kind of spirit, what's recognized in Shintoism as kami. Anything can be seen as kami: mountains, ancestors, even forces of nature themselves. And this idea reveals itself in a number of interesting ways throughout the game. The most obvious being with the Koroks, the little tree spirits that you uncover all throughout the world. In a sense, a direct personification of kami. Or there's the wider theme of purging Ganon's malice and corruption from the world, reflecting a Shinto purification of nature. In fact, even Ganon himself was based directly on a vengeful spirit from Shintoism, Taira no Masakado, a figure from history who's now been deified as this typhoon-like force of nature. But I'm not sure any of these parallels can show us what really makes Shinto so essential to Breath of the Wild. Because it's not about surface imagery or references, it's something that lies at the very heart of this game. And there's one final place I want to show you that helped me to see this. This is the giant camphor tree of Takeo, which strangely is quite close to where I live. It's thought to be over 3,000 years old, said to house a sacred kami within. And it very well might have been what inspired the great Deku tree. This is something that many see as the symbolic heart of the franchise, going all the way back to Ocarina of Time. And in Breath of the Wild, the Deku tree is one of the last major discoveries that you come upon in the game. This wise, ancient figure that's been watching over the Master Sword and the Kingdom of Hyrule for the past 100 years.
Well, it's you.
But more than that, the Deku tree is also at the very center of an idea that's hidden all throughout the game. One that's deeply and fundamentally Japanese. Because Shintoism, at its core, is a way of looking at the world. It's about truly seeing the life that exists within all things, and to feel a sense of awe in its presence. What guided every inspiration that we've come upon on this journey was this effort from the creators to look towards the life around them. In the cities they lived, in the places they grew up, in the smallest details of culture or the quietest corners of the countryside. It's this way of seeing that really makes Breath of the Wild feel so alive. This game is a vast and open garden to explore, just as Miyamoto once imagined. And it's a garden that teaches you to notice.
Open your eyes.
Hello again, thanks for watching. If you'd like to know more about all the different locations from this video, then you can actually find an in-depth travel guide over on our Patreon right now. For every video that we make, you can find one of these, as well as an exclusive podcast episode and other behind-the-scenes stuff. So if you'd like to support us and join this list of very generous people, that would be incredibly helpful. Thank you.